When you play a fighting game, the characters you play as most likely study some form of exaggerated martial arts. And because of that, most fighting games have those characters fighting with their fists. Even if they have weapons or are skilled with weapons, the only way they will use it is if they combo into it. I've always felt that the reason fighting games have you use your fists most of the time is because if the characters mainly use weapons, then the fighting system as designed by the developers has to take into account the weight, power, and range of those weapons in order to create a properly balanced fighting system. The main fighting game franchise that has done this is Soulcalibur, a fighting series that's all about the weapons that the characters use. The specific game I'm looking at today is the fourth one in the series known as Soulcalibur 3. Why this one in particular? Well, initially because it was the easiest one I could get a hold of, until I realized I could also get Soulcalibur 1 and 2 on Xbox Marketplace. But I'm also looking at this game due to the type of experience this fighting game gave me compared to the others. Soulcalibur 3 is the fourth game of the Soul series, with the first two games and Soul Edge preceding it, and it introduced numerous features such as the story-driven Tales of Souls mode, a character creation mode, and Chronicles of the Sword mode, which is especially interesting. And in this review, I plan on analyzing each of them based on my own experiences with them. So let's begin.
Soulcalibur 3.
Sorry to keep you. You're up next.
Gotcha!
Too slow! Now this take and die!
When you first boot up the game, I would advise you to sit through the logos that some people may normally skip, because that would cause you to miss out on one of the best opening movies I have ever seen. The intro starts out by showing what happened at the end of Soulcalibur 2, with Siegfried stabbing Soul Edge, the title over a black screen, and then a showcase of previous characters and the new characters doing their own thing, and then fighting one another. Now, showcasing characters in this manner is nothing special in a fighting game intro, but I especially love the way it is done in Soulcalibur 3. The characters have detailed facial expressions, showing off their emotions in the various scenes quite well. The brief instances of fighting are pretty well choreographed, and the sounds of the different weapons clashing with each other sound really good. The music that plays throughout the intro is incredibly well orchestrated, and it gives the entire intro an epic feel. In fact, if I had to describe the intro in one word, it would be epic. And this entire intro builds you up so well for this game's epic story, the way it subtly informs you of the various characters' conflicts using music, the characters' expressions, and well done cinematography. And because of that, this intro is now one of my favorite intros of all time. Now, unlike the Mortal Kombat review, I should be able to talk about the story this time. The story is told in numerous ways through our first mode called Tales of Souls, where you choose a character and play out their individual legends. But before I played Tales of Souls, I had to learn of Soulcalibur 3's backstory, which the game doesn't really provide you in its entirety. I had no idea what exactly went down in the previous games, as I had to look it up, and from what I found, the backstory isn't all that complicated, and that makes me wonder why the game couldn't just explain what's going on in a short cutscene. But it is possible to piece together what's going on by playing through Tales of Souls numerous times, and depending on who you are, the story might be best experienced in that form. So the lack of backstory, at least right away, is not that much of an issue. You start off Tales of Souls by selecting one of 18 characters available for story mode. The story then begins with a text scroll detailing the backstory of that character. Not his or her entire backstory, mind you, but enough backstory to preface this character's role during this part of the series. You are then thrust into an adventure to fulfill that character's goal. Tales of Souls consist of 10 sequences called episodes, and all episodes consist of a story text and a single one-round fight, with the exception of the final episode, which consists of 2 fights, including a fight with the final boss. In between some of the episodes, you'll be asked to make a couple of A and B decisions that will determine the path that your selected character will take. These different paths have different fights, and sometimes choosing some specific choices, while not losing a single fight along the way, will lead to incredibly difficult and unique bonus fights, in which you are only given one chance to win. These decisions do not affect the endings for the individual characters. The endings are actually determined by the last of a series of QuickTime events that regularly appear in this mode. Now, I found the QuickTime events to be problematic. The first time a QuickTime event popped up, I was completely unprepared for it, because I don't usually do this sort of thing in fighting games. I was also unprepared for the next couple of times, because the symbols that show up on the screen don't match the buttons on my PlayStation controller, and because of that, it took me a long time before I could react properly to any of them. But since the punishment for failing QuickTime events were either small or gone after a retry, I didn't really mind them that much. However, I really dislike the fact that the QuickTime events determined the ending, because if I failed to input the QuickTime event correctly, it was very likely I would have gotten the unambiguous bad end for that character. And that really sucks, because whenever I experienced that, it felt like I wasted a bunch of time helping that character along, only to fail. This problem became non-existent once I discovered that you could re-watch cutscenes and retry the QuickTime events within those cutscenes, but that doesn't change the fact that my initial experience with the QuickTime events was incredibly frustrating. Plus, the fact that the endings are determined by QuickTime events rather than by the choices you make in-game feels like wasted potential.
Just do it!
If certain choices you made determined the endings instead, then I think that the story of these characters would be much more engaging, as it would make the player think about his choices more. The character where I feel this has the most potential is Setsuka, because depending on your choices, her journey will change drastically. She will either successfully fulfill her revenge in the final episode, or she will be cursed and hanging on to her dear life for most of the story, where her primary goal will change from revenge to just simply trying to survive. These two journeys could result in two very different endings, maybe by changing the lesson she learns, or changing whether or not she learns the lesson in the first place, or if she chooses a much darker path. But the journey doesn't affect the ending at all, because no matter what choices you make, it will always be determined by whether or not you enter the input. But despite that, Tales of Souls is still pretty fun and engaging. Even if your choices don't change the ending, it is pretty cool to see the different paths the characters take. And it's also nice that the different decisions lead to different fights, and sometimes even challenging bonus fights. And while these bonus fights are difficult, they are pretty cool with how they showcase the bonus characters. Plus, losing the fights have no negative effect on the game. There are a decent amount of cutscenes that will play during each session of Tales of Souls, and besides the QuickTime events, they are pretty enjoyable to watch with how they add to the story. You do often see cutscenes repeat, but depending on the character you play as, the dialogue will change accordingly, so it never gets irritatingly repetitive. At least that was the case in my experience when I played through every single character's story. Except Rock's. However, I do raise an eyebrow when I find the reuse of dialogue in certain scenes.
Were you looking forward to winning? Oh, I'm sorry. Were you looking forward to winning? Oh, I'm sorry.
So overall, Tales of Souls is a rewarding experience. As someone who knew nothing about the Soulcalibur story before playing this game, I had a lot of fun getting to know these characters, with some of my favorites including Setsuka, Siegfried, and Raphael. The story is nowhere near the epic level of the game's intro, but it's still a fun journey with plenty of replay value, at least with your favorite characters.
I have no intention of dying here.
Next up on our list of modes is Chronicles of the Sword mode, which is an especially odd addition for any fighting game. Chronicles of the Sword has a story that takes place in a universe mostly different from the Soulcalibur universe. But not only is the universe different, but the gameplay is a mix of a fighting game and an on-the-rails RTS. This story takes place in a universe that is home to 3 countries known as the Kingdom of Dalkia, the Maltese Republic, and the Grandal Empire. You play as a young cadet who you create through the game's character creation, and you are chosen to lead an army against the neighboring countries. Your character and his or her allies will face more and more difficult enemies as you conquer the other nations. But as you progress, you catch wind of a conspiracy that causes your main character to question his loyalties and what exactly he is fighting for.
Surprised? Well, it's just as you see. I must protect this country.
Now on a side note, this was really the first time I've experienced character creation, which is a mode I plan to talk about a bit later, but for now I need to point out that being asked to create my own personal avatar when I didn't have even half the character creation items unlocked was kind of disheartening, because I didn't have enough parts to create the character I wanted. This may not be an issue for other people because they might want to create a more personalized character rather than my cosplay of Sun Hawk, but I feel that in any case it still might be possible that the amount of parts you have unlocked up until then may not be enough. Plus, I played as every single character in Tales of Souls before playing this, so I thought I had quite a few things unlocked. But until I talk about that, I still need to talk about Chronicles of the Sword. So as I stated before, Chronicles of the Sword is an on-the-rails RTS. And as for what I mean by that, each level of Chronicles of the Sword, aka each Chronicle, is a large map with several strongholds and a main base that belong to each opposing faction. Each of these buildings are connected by paths that your units and the enemy's units have to travel on. The goal of each Chronicle is to conquer the enemy's main base by having your units conquer the towers controlled by them in order to open up a path. Though it sometimes changes, this is usually the enemy's goal as well, as you must actively fight them off and work to steadily gain ground and hold your defense. Now, depending on the Chronicle, you can have up to 5 units in your army. Your main character is always required to participate, but for your other units you can either pick the pre-created characters that the game provides for you and allows you to customize, or you can create even more characters with the cost of them starting at level 1. Before each battle, you have to assign each of your chosen units into one of 4 unit types with varying stats. Cavalry is the fastest unit with decent attack stats, but is the slowest when taking strongholds. Infantry is the most well-rounded unit with decent speed, the best attack, and also decent stronghold taking ability. Knights are tanks, and they have the best stronghold taking abilities. However, they are also the slowest by a lot, and in hindsight they are probably better used for defense and not offense. Bandits have decent speed and okay attack, but their ability to hastily conquer fortresses is what defines them. There are 2 methods of fighting enemies in-game. You can either fight them on the map by slowly whittling down each other's health, or you can choose to engage them in a traditional Soulcalibur fight. You mostly have a choice between these 2 combat options. However, when you deplete a stronghold's health while it has enemy units inside, you will have to engage and defeat every single enemy inside before the stronghold is yours. After Chronicle 3, you are able to fight the Soulcalibur characters, who are all level 60. You don't get any special unlocks for beating them, but you can grind off of them, and sometimes beating them can open up an alternate path to the objective. Now speaking of grinding, I need to talk about my first problem with Chronicles of the Sword. At the beginning, when you create your cadet, you also have to choose his class, and depending on which class you choose, you will unlock the 2 Soulcalibur character fighting styles tied to that class after fighting a large amount of battles. Unlocking these classes for your cadet is no problem, since the game makes it so that you have to play as him in each mission. However, if you want to unlock every single character class in character creation, you need to spend a lot of time playing with a single class to unlock them. This wouldn't be much of a problem if it wasn't for the rate at which the difficulty increased in Chronicles. Because of the fact that enemies will become stronger in both level and skill will mean that you'll need a party that can keep up with them. In order to have this party, you can only focus on leveling up a select few, which means that you will likely unlock only those classes in a single playthrough. In fact, I was only able to unlock the character classes tied to only 3 characters because of my early attempts at experimentation. I had to use the preset classes to fill the other slots. But even with those classes making up for my experimentation setting me back, I still found myself grinding off really tough enemies for extended periods of time in order to complete some of the more tougher Chronicles. I really wanted to try out the new classes and also to become good with them. And I really wanted to experiment with the creation system because experimenting with these types of modes can be such a good time, as it allows one to express their imagination. But with its increasing difficulty and my long grinding sessions against tough enemies, Chronicles of the Sword just heavily discourages experimentation throughout all 20 Chronicles, which is such a glaring issue considering the large amount of options you have alongside the character creation. But past the issues with difficulty and player experimentation, Chronicles mostly plays just fine. There are many strategies you can implement in order to succeed, such as having multiple units attack multiple fortresses at once in order to keep the enemy from ganging up on a single unit. If you don't feel like fighting a unit Soulcalibur style, you can have multiple units gang up on that unit and beat them with RTS combat. Another strategy is that you can have one of your units be the Knight class in order to tank out against a tough enemy so as to buy time until downed units respawn. Most of these strategies are optional though, as I found that you can get through most Chronicles by making everyone a bandit class and having them take control of a ton of strongholds using their speed. The only really difficult part of Chronicles of the Sword are the Soulcalibur fights themselves, and while different strategies and unit setups can make Chronicles easier, there is nothing to reinforce using those strategies other than the difficulty of the much later Chronicles. If Chronicles had a ranking system, I feel that it could really help reinforce different playstyles and put it over the top in terms of quality. A gameplay element like that could warrant the replaying of Chronicles in order to unlock all of the different character classes. However, if there's one gameplay element in Chronicles that I could really do without, it would be what I'm going to call the special battles. Now to preface these special battles, let's reiterate. I have already said that whenever you or an enemy deplete a stronghold's health, they will have to fight whoever is inside in order to completely take over the stronghold. For most of the beginning of the game, these fights are fought relatively normal, with no special circumstances attached. However, the more you progress, the more often you will deplete a stronghold's health and come across a battle containing a special hazard that is tied to said stronghold and will only affect you and not your opponent. These hazards include the stage being slippery, an earthquake happening every few seconds, health slowly decreasing, attack strength being altered, and etc. As there are way too many to just list them all. Plus, I don't think I encountered all of them anyway. These fights don't seem so bad at first, but as I progressed, the enemy AI got much better, and the difficulty from that combined with dealing with the stage hazards just made me wish multiple times that I was fighting the enemy and testing my skills against them alone. Whenever I fight a special battle against a tough enemy, it never feels like a test of skill, because one moment I will be doing good, but then during the slippery stage hazard I will slip off. Or in another scenario, an earthquake will go off, knocking my character out of his or her guard, causing me to lose. The more I progressed, the more ridiculously difficult these special battles became. One hazard made it so that enemies' attacks couldn't be blocked at all. Another one made it so that enemies won't even flinch against any of your attacks. And another makes it so that every single attack that lands on you will stun you. There are much more than just 3 of these ridiculous effects, but one of the worst instances occurred during Chronicle 11. Chronicle 11 is designed so that halfway through all of the paths converge on this stronghold. The stronghold's hazard is that your attack strength is lowered, which doesn't seem like such a huge deal, but the amount that your attack is lowered is just absurd. In order to even have a chance at taking down the stronghold, you have to gather most of your units -1 so that you can respawn, and when you fight the unit inside, make sure you use your most familiar classes and do as much damage as possible. But even when I did this, it still took me a long time with many close failures until I could beat him. And while I felt a huge sense of accomplishment from doing so, that encounter was immediately followed up with the enemy trying to retake the fortress with like 5 high-leveled units. I mean, sure, I had the advantage now that my army was in control of the stronghold, but I only had 2 units on the field, and one of them was incredibly low on health. I tried to defend the stronghold with those 2 units, but I ended up dying and I had to do the entire Chronicle all over again. But that wasn't even the worst instance of special battles. The worst one is the reason that I've yet to actually complete Chronicles of the Sword.
You really stand out too much. The people love you. Such an irritating sight to behold. But now, I regret not killing you myself when I had the chance.
Now I want to apologize, because I understand that this means I didn't technically beat the game, and that may undermine the credibility of this review. But the final boss of Chronicles of the Sword absorbs chunks of your health every time he hits you with this sword. And what that means is that you can get some really good hits in and make a lot of progress on his health bar, only to lose all of it by slipping up and getting comboed because the final boss's AI is probably the single most difficult to deal with in the entire game. You could just get some good hits in and then kill yourself so that he maintains lowered health in the next fight, but that's an impossible decision to make because you can't possibly gauge whether or not you've taken enough of his health or if you can go for hits. Plus, he can still regain his lost health by whooping your next guy. Now I'm not saying that Strife, that's his name by the way, can't be beat, But this boss is so mentally taxing with the way you can make progress on him and then immediately lose it all over and over again that I just gave up. I have over 4 hours of footage recorded of every single attempt on this boss, but in the end, I guess I just couldn't handle it. But despite all of that, Chronicles of the Sword is by far the most interesting experience I have ever had in a fighting game. It has competent game mechanics, and even though it isn't that difficult, for the most part, I still found myself becoming incredibly good with the created character classes, to the point where I even became sort of attached to the characters using them. Not to the degree of the actual Soulcalibur cast, but just a little bit. But the problem with Chronicles is that one moment you will be fighting challenging enemies and taking bases, and then you will suddenly reach one of the special battles. Due to the advantage your opponent gets, you will suddenly have to adjust to fighting with this effect, and due to the difficulty of that, combined with the difficulty of the opponent, the fight will likely take you several tries while also frustrating the hell out of you. Plus, when you add in the inability to experiment with all the different classes, Chronicles of the Sword ends up being an incredibly mixed, but still an interesting experience overall. I guess as far as my recommendation goes for this mode, I'd say try it until you unlock the classes you want and then stop. Up next we have World Competition, which I don't really have that much to say about, partly due to it being a pretty simple setup. In World Competition, you fight in a tournament with AI characters, and the further you get, the more money you gain for extras. It's simple, it's a nice way to practice, and it's a nice way to earn extra cash. After that, there's Soul Arena, which consists of a challenge mode with various challenges to take on, such as fighting while collecting coins, arguing over who should have a very explosive bomb, chasing waifus around the arena, and overall just incredibly bizarre fights. This mode is pretty fun, and the challenges are definitely challenging, but with only 12 challenges available, it's pretty limited. They're fun, but barely last, and you can probably complete all of them within 1 to 2 hours. There are multiple difficulty settings for each of the challenges, but since you aren't really unlocking anything from doing them, there's no reason to do them unless you really want to challenge yourself. After the challenges, we have Quick Play, and as the name implies, it quickly sets up a series of 2-round fights that increase in difficulty as you progress. This mode is also nothing special, but I personally found it a great way to practice with the different characters, in an environment other than the practice mode. Plus, the ability to retry any match allows you to repeatedly try to get good without the frustration that could be caused by resetting your progress. But now, I need to talk about another unique mode Soulcalibur 3 introduced, and that is character creation. Character creation was not a common thing in fighting games back then, and nowadays it still isn't common, due to the potential balancing issues it could cause. In the fighting games that I've played that have character creation, they get around this by restricting the class of the character to the character classes you can already play as. But I have already mentioned that this game has classes exclusive to creating a character, which is nice when you want to create a specific type of character. I didn't play this game that much with other people before this review, but as far as I can tell, the created character classes are pretty balanced, though they are much harder to learn and get good at compared to the regular classes. There are a ton of options to choose from when considering your character's appearance. There are a wide variety of faces, hairstyles, and clothing, but all of the clothing you can unlock is set in medieval times. So if you want to create a more modern-looking character, you're out of luck. I also have a bit of a problem with the fact that you have to choose a character's class before you can create the character, because that means if you accidentally choose the wrong one, you have to reset your character's appearance, and that can be really irritating. But besides that, there are a ton of options at your disposal, which allows for a wide variety of possibilities. However, there is a problem with unlocking all of them. The way unlocks in this game work is that while some things in this game can be unlocked from completing specific challenges, most of them are unlocked based on the amount of fights you participate in, which is fine. I just like that playing the game will unlock things, as I had trouble unlocking specific things such as certain characters. Plus, it means that no matter what you are doing, you will always be making progress. I also like that unlocking the main character styles is restricted to playing classes in Chronicles of the Sword. But unlocking clothing, among other cosmetics, is a bit different. When you unlock clothing for the Create a Character mode, you don't unlock it for use, you unlock it in the store. You of course need money in order to buy these items from the store, which you earn by beating various parts of the game. But as of this review, I have played through 95% of Chronicles of the Sword, played through the story mode with all of the characters, and I have still yet to gather enough money to purchase everything. If you want to be creative with your character and have all options at your disposal, then it will take an incredibly long time. You will have to dedicate a lot of hours to playing Soulcalibur 3, which most people won't want to do due to the existence of other games. It is incredibly baffling, but on the other side of this issue, the long length it takes to unlock everything means that you can spend a lot of time exploring what Soulcalibur 3 has to offer. With how long it will take you to complete the individual modes, Soulcalibur 3's single-player content is extensive, and could possibly hold you over for an incredibly long period of time. By the time you do unlock everything, you will likely be an expert with all of the main and custom character fighting styles, and you would have become a true Soulcalibur legend, per se. If you're willing to put up with how long it takes to unlock everything, there is much to gain. But I can't speak for everyone, and the only reason I've stopped playing the game was because I myself believe to have sufficiently explored all of the modes to write a proper review. But up until this point, I have enjoyed this game because the actual fighting is very well done. The most important aspect of any fighting game is the combat. The quality of the regular versus mode and everything else the combat is implemented into depends on it. First of all, in order to learn the combat system, the game provides one of the best fighting game tutorials I have ever seen. It goes over every single aspect of the fighting system, and it makes sure that you master it on a basic level. And the Owl Man, known as Olkadan, encouraging you throughout the individual lessons doesn't hurt either. Now, as I have mentioned before, what makes Soulcalibur's combat system stand out from the others is its use of weapons. Mainly its use of weapons in an 8-way run fighting style. Everyone has the ability to do the same basic set of movements. You can attack horizontally for quick, short-ranged hits, you can attack vertically for more powerful but easier to dodge hits, you have a kick for quickly striking enemies and also knocking them away, and you have a guard button for defense. Using the directional freedom of the combat's 8-way movement, you can produce a variety of moves and combo attacks with each character's style. You can also produce special attacks by pressing 2 buttons at the same time. Guard plus either the horizontal or vertical attack button produces 2 types of throws. Other 2-button combinations create more elaborate attacks, which can also be altered by inputting a direction. You can also duck, which gives you 2 types of blocking stances, and also gives you access to a variety of low attacks and rising attacks. With the latter, you input commands just as your character begins to stand back up. Every character has at least one unblockable attack, which, as the name implies, cannot be blocked and does a lot of damage. Every character can also parry attacks using guard plus a forward directional input. Now, to me it seems that in order to master the combat of Soulcalibur 3, you really have to master the use of each weapon. Heavy weapon users like Siegfried and Nightmare have very powerful attacks, but most of their moveset is incredibly slow, so you really have to master the slow timing of their attacks in order to deal the most damage. Characters like Killick or Song Mina are a bit faster, but their weapons are mostly long range, which means it's better to keep your distance most of the time. Taki and Setsuka are best used aggressively due to their fast and short-ranged attacks. These were just a few examples, as there are a lot of characters in Soulcalibur that all have distinguishing styles and strategies. One thing I really like about the combat system is just how diverse all of the characters are due to a combination of their weapon and moveset. While a character's weapon somewhat determines how they will fight, the character's special moves further define them and what strategies you will use with them. Many of the character's unblockable attacks have different triggers, and some of the characters have more than one unblockable attack. A lot of characters also have stances, which open up a whole new selection of attack moves, such as Siegfried and Nightmare's various stances, or Yoshimitsu's helicopter tech. But one thing I really like is that despite the character's weapons restricting on how and when they should land attacks, all of the characters have enough moves to allow them to escape and or temporarily adapt to a situation that's not suited to their weapons. I also really love how the 8-way run system complements the weapon-based combat by allowing special moves based around it, and how it's just loose enough to make you feel a whole lot of freedom while fighting, while also remaining balanced. I remember so many great moments from the combat, such as when you slide kick an enemy off the arena, or when you manage to land a really powerful attack or combo, or when you have a really intense standoff with the opponent as you both weave around the arena, waiting for the right opportunity to get in there and strike. It's also really satisfying when you get better at the game and become attached to a character's style through gameplay and story. Bosses and enemies that were difficult before will become easier as you learn the complexities of the system, and though the joy of this is diminished a little by some of the battles in Chronicles of the Sword, I thoroughly enjoyed the combat of Soulcalibur 3. But if I had any complaints, it's that some of the character creation classes are really hard to learn, and the charge system is something that I never really use, because stopping to charge an attack seems like a waste of time and also too much of a risk. This video has been going on pretty long now, and it is definitely a testament to the amount of content in Soulcalibur 3. Despite its flaws concerning unlocking content and some of the absurd boss fights, Soulcalibur 3 is a fighting game you can spend a whole lot of time on. The story mode is incredibly good, despite the lost potential for branching story paths and the QuickTime events. As a person who knew nothing about the Soulcalibur story beforehand, I am definitely invested now, as I have become attached to a lot of its characters. The other modes are also pretty good, if flawed. The later boss fights of Chronicles of the Sword really hold it back, but it's still a pretty enjoyable mode as you get to become good with a good variety of new fighting styles. And the other modes are also pretty fun, if not as lengthy. And it's all brought together by one of the best combat systems I have ever experienced in a fighting game. One thing I found myself doing at the end of a lot of my play sessions was go into the art gallery mode and view a slideshow of all of the art I have purchased thus far. The song that plays when you are in that mode sounds great and nostalgic. Besides the quality of the game and the modes itself, if there's any testament to how great this game is, it's the emotions one can feel after a long play session listening to this. Thank you for watching.